Welcome to another episode of Fridays with Fawn. I'm Fawn Lopez, publisher of Modern Healthcare and Vice President at Crane Communications. Thank you for joining us. My guest today is Michele Courton Brown, Vice President, Business Development, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts. Michele, it's a pleasure to speak with you today. Thank you for joining me.
Fawn, thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you. Michele, you have an extensive and diverse background in philanthropy. Through leading advocacy organizations, advising high net worth individuals, serving on nonprofit boards, and speaking and writing on this topic. Based on this work, what do you think are the biggest issues in healthcare that philanthropy can help to address?
Well, that's an interesting question, Fawn. And I think there are many things that philanthropy can do. And I think some of those ways in which philanthropy can be more engaged is around coalescing themselves to be in a problem resolution mode. So whether it's access to healthcare and investments in community health centers or in workforce development programs, I would love to see philanthropic organizations band together and develop a campaign around how we can solve problems. Sometimes we put a little bit of money towards something and it becomes a sustained thing and it gets funded year after year after year. What if we were about outcomes and measured ourselves as philanthropists around how we solve problems? So if we want to have, every child receive well visits, what would that require? And what investments do we need to make that happen? Just one example.
And what stops us from doing that?
We are, I think, a society, hugely independent. And I think the philanthropic community, I can't speak for them, but I see the trending around, I've got a great idea. I've got my vision for how I'd like the world to work, and I will invest accordingly. And I think that if we put the same pressure on the nonprofit community, we ask them to collaborate, we ask them to be efficient with funds. I think if we turn that back on ourselves as a philanthropic community, not just our own foundations or our family giving, but really as a community, what do we want our community to look like? And what do we need to do to invest to make that happen? That's a different conversation entirely.
Makes a lot of sense. Thank you. So I know you are personally committed to increasing cultural competencies to improve health outcomes. How do you think the pandemic, staff shortages, and similar challenges have impacted cultural competency in healthcare?
So I believe the cultural competency is challenged by some of the experiences we're having today. Certainly, the changing demographics in this country require healthcare workers who are more culturally competent, who have different language proficiency, who understand the cultural norms of different countries and cultures, and bringing that to bear in the healthcare industry. So where there is this gap, I think there's going to be an opportunity to have that filled by new workers whose skills in the past have been considered secondary, who perhaps will now have those deemed as primary core skills to have to be in the industry.
Okay, that's great. So earlier this year, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts launched a health equity business accelerator to help address both of those issues. Can you tell me how the program works and what its goals are?
Sure, Fawn. I'll try to make it short, but in essence, Blue Cross Blue Shield has had a deep commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. We've done that in a lot of ways, supporting community and supporting our employees. When I took over the helm of our venture fund, Zaffer, I sort of reached down to think about how we could be impactful in this space as well. What I realized through research was that only 3% of the $147 billion that venture funds invested in startup companies went to women and people of color. What that told me was that there were many people whose voices were not being heard in this space. So from our perch, I wanted to be impactful. So we stood up the Health Equity Business Accelerator program to be supportive of underrepresented CEOs. And so the first cohort that just graduated in June of this year are companies that work in the healthcare space. What's interesting about these companies is because they did not have access to capital, many of them had a idea or a business that had moved well past ideation. These are companies that were generating customers and had proof of product, right? The viability of their product. But what they didn't have was capital. So I developed a thesis that access to capital was core, but what's also important in the thesis was access to network, access to mentorship, the ability to tap into the ecosystem of venture, which can sometimes feel a little closed for people who are different. And we took that thesis to about 50 healthcare startup companies, and we asked them the questions. Do you have access to capital? What else do you need? And we felt very validated that our thesis was proved out by these 40 or 50 companies that we met with. At the end of the day, we identified 5 companies that really rose to the top of our evaluation, and we chose them to be in our first cohort. These companies are doing interesting work, not just in the health equity space, but in the health space generally. I'd love to tell you a little bit about them.
Love to hear them.
I'll start with TK Intelligence. This is a company founded by a practicing psychiatrist who developed an AI solution that helps to assess the emotional distress of pediatric patients. Sometimes you might imagine children are hesitant to be completely transparent about their emotional health, maybe in part because they don't have the language around that or because they are afraid of punishment. But the therapist now has a tool through TK Intelligence's AI solution to assess that stress and determine the next best mental health options for those kids, and to really keep them from, more significant actions like suicide, right? So this is just one solution of one portfolio company. I'll share another one. MedHall is a company based in Memphis, Tennessee, that is providing culturally competent transportation services for patients who can't take regular modes of transportation. They might have physical ailments, they might have mental challenges, they might have autoimmune challenges. This is a program that uses, almost like Uber, the unused time of drivers who've been validated to transport patients to their doctor's appointments.
Wow, that's great. So you're offering not only capital support, but also connections to a network and resources.
Absolutely. I think key to this program is not just the investment, which is an equity investment, not a grant. We have partnered each one of the portfolio companies with a Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts executive who's providing insights about their own business, but also access to their own network. We partnered with an organization called HealthBox that does a lot of consultation with startups to support milestone development and to help them get ready to make pitches to the investment community. We had not one, but 2 pitch programs for those portfolio companies. Really pleased to share that they were able to pick up interest among the venture community to really help them grow their businesses.
That is amazing. So this was your first cohort, and you had 5 companies?
We had 5 companies. We
wonderful.
graduated the group in June. Our initial investment of $750,000 in those 5 companies has already been multiplied by more than 3 times by these companies, and we're just getting started. And I'm really pleased to announce that we're going to be launching a second cohort of companies in January. And we're hoping to move that number from 5 to 7. We've had great interest, great companies out there. And we're really looking forward to supporting these companies that are providing vital health supports, but also have the opportunity for significant financial return.
Absolutely. What a brilliant strategy that is. Congratulations on your first cohort, and best wishes for the next one.
Indeed. And if anybody has some companies, let me know.
Oh, yes, absolutely. You can bet on that. So I understand that this Accelerator program is part of a larger Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts health justice strategy. What does that include, and what does
Fawn,
that mean?
Fawn, I'm so glad you asked me that question. We are trying to operate really on all cylinders. So, in our community portfolio that includes our philanthropy and corporate citizenship, we are interested in going after some of the social determinants of health that we can support. So, supporting programs that seek to eradicate food deserts, one area of particular focus for us, interested in funding nutrition programs, access to health, just a couple of examples of what my partners on the foundation side and community citizenship are up to. On the clinical side, we are doing some cutting edge work providing data to our providers around the health equity status of their panels. And we're hoping to equip those providers with information that helps transform how they care for those members.
That's great. So, and how long have you been with Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts?
It's been about 2.5 years. I actually joined the week that George Floyd was murdered. And
Oh,
so
wow.
it was one of those moments where, many companies were trying to reconcile how to navigate the broad emotions and concerns that associates had. And I was super proud to be with Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts because they opened up the doors for employees, associates to have conversations, but also
Mhm.
sought external ways in which we could be impactful around eradicating these kinds of issues.
Thank you for your work in this very important area. So you earlier I mentioned you've had an extensive career in philanthropy
Mhm.
as well as advocacy work. What would you consider to be your greatest professional achievement thus far?
I think the thing I'm most proud of is having had the opportunity to work in collaboration with colleagues, either inside the organizations I worked with or outside, to
Mhm.
make exponential impact and to leave legacies of programs that will continue moving forward. So I believe that the Accelerator is just one example of the ways in which investments can support companies and have that be a multiplier effect, our ability to allow companies to hire more people and to really support the economics of their communities. Um, Also interested in the ways in which we've been able to invest in companies more broadly that are focused on social determinants of health and what it means for their companies to be successful. They're really changing lives.
100%. So let's talk about leadership.
Mhm,
Um, you're a woman of color.
mhm.
You have done an amazing job in your career, but women and people of color are still underrepresented in leadership roles and in boardrooms. What advice can you give other women and people of color who are looking to advance their career?
Let me just share from my perspective. I've had a lot of firsts in my background. And what I've come to understand is that relationships matter. The ability to lead is often predicated on the ability to influence. My grandmother taught me a long time ago that you can't lead if no one follows. So we have to have vision. We have to develop fellowship and the ability to influence others, whether they report directly to us or don't, or can be part of the solution to help move something forward. Um, I think it's really important to develop those relationships, but it starts with vision and with owning your point of view. Um, I'm often surprised when I've been in a number of meetings where someone will have a really good idea, but they'll mention it to me after the meeting because they are not so confident about expressing it in that moment. And I think that if you have a seat at the table, it's really incumbent upon you to put your voice out there, to state your opinion, to volunteer to take on a project, to go that extra mile to assure that your voice is heard.
Absolutely. Michele, if you were able to go back in time 10 years, let's say, what would you tell your younger self about leadership that you did not know then?
That competency is core, but so is being authentically you in the workforce. And sometimes it takes a little work to have the confidence to be authentically you in the workforce, but it's worth pushing through those anxieties to get there. And I think it's okay to be vulnerable. I think about at the beginning of the pandemic, I was CEO of a startup company, and we worked in the healthcare space and we sold into hospitals and health plans. Well, what was the most disrespectful thing you could do during the pandemic? Call a hospital or health plan and have nothing to say about the pandemic, right? We
Yeah.
couldn't sell. And I had deep concerns about how we were going to sustain ourselves over a prolonged period. We had no idea. If you remember, we went
Mhm.
home for 2 weeks and we were
Yeah.
home for 2 years, right? And I had to have the conversation with my staff about my fears for the organization.
Yeah.
And we turn those fears into planning. So, well, if we can't sell, what can we do in this moment? Well, what we can do in this moment is plan, right?
Yeah.
In this moment, we can work on product. In this moment, we can plan our marketing efforts. And that's what we did.
Yeah.
And the culmination of that work resulted in the company that I worked for being recognized by Inc. 5000 magazine as as the 5,000 fastest growing companies in the country in 2021.
Wow.
So
Congratulations.
thank you. So sometimes that vulnerability can be shared with people, and then they're free to be a little vulnerable, and then you can work past that to be productive.
And get their support, get their help and ideas to help you move, to help you pivot, right? The
Absolutely.
ability to pivot quickly is something that I think is it's we all have had to learn along the way.
Fawn, I'm glad that you mentioned the idea of pivoting because I think part of that pivot involves understanding the resources and assets that you have within your organization. And as a
Mhm.
leader, you really do have to tap into an understanding of the skill base of your team and give them an opportunity to soar, right?
Yeah.
It's not a time to be deeply controlling. It's really a time to open up and allow new voices, different voices, all voices to be heard and honored.
And empower people to make decisions.
Absolutely.
So is there anyone who you would credit with helping you to get to where you are today?
So I've been the beneficiary of some amazing mentors and bosses. I think about my career in philanthropy. I joined what was then the First National Bank of Boston. It's now a legacy company of Bank of America. But I work with this amazing man named Ira Jackson. And he was visionary, he was collaborative, he was connected, and he was authentic. And I had in my early 30s an opportunity to sit at his right hand and to really learn the power of engaging the community. And I think about the corollary of the work I did in philanthropy, where I didn't want to do something to someone, I wanted to work with people. And I've tried to hold on to that in all of the other careers that I've had, that my objective is to be of service and to be in collaboration with the people I hope to support, as opposed to feeling like I've got all the answers or that I have to even have all the answers,
Hmm.
but to really be respectful of knowledge and assets and leverage those to make positive change.
That's fantastic. So I'm sure you have a plate full. Your plate is full. How do you balance work and life responsibilities? What advice would you give women who are struggling with work-life balance today?
So I think first and foremost, I would say there's a season for everything. And it is okay if you have to take a step aside or a step back for a moment. Your children are only your children for a period of time, right? And depending on your family circumstances and what you're able to do, I think it's important to recognize that we are in control of the experience that our families have. And that with authenticity, particularly in this new hybrid environment, we can carve out more time to be more fully present with our families, and that we should do that. But if a role doesn't serve you, if your management team can't give you what you need, then I think it's incumbent upon us to be the CEOs of our own lives and figure out what is a way to be professionally fulfilled and still have that balance. And that's okay too.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for your willingness to share your time with us. And really, I know how busy you are. And thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you, Fawn. This has been a blast. I really appreciate the chance to talk with you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. As always, I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Fridays with Fawn.